I never thought I'd be the one to say this, but here goes. I'm a terrible wife and an even worse mother. There, I said it. The words taste like ash in my mouth, but they're true. And it all came crushing down on me in one spectacularly awful moment at the Hendersons' annual summer soiree. Picture this. A sprawling backyard dotted with fairy lights, the air thick with the scent of grilled lobster and expensive perfume. The who's who of our little suburban enclave, all dressed to the nines, sipping champagne and pretending they actually like each other. And there I was, Evelyn Prescott, real estate mogul extraordinaire, holding court like the queen bee I thought I was. Oh, Daniel. I laughed, the sound brittle and forced even to my own ears. He's probably at home, whipping up another one of his little culinary experiments. You know how he is, always playing house while the rest of us are out here living in the real world. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, sharp and cutting. I saw the exact moment they hit their mark, Daniel's face crumpling like a discarded napkin. He stood there, frozen, a tray of his homemade hors d'oeuvres clutched in his hands. How long had he been standing there? Long enough, apparently. Evelyn, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I think I'll head home now. And just like that he was gone, leaving me standing there with the bitter taste of regret in my mouth and a room full of stunned onlookers. But let me back up a bit. How did I get here? How did I become the kind of woman who would publicly humiliate her husband, the man who had stood by me through thick and thin? The answer, like most things in life, was complicated. But if I had to pinpoint a single moment, it would be a conversation I had with my father when I was just a little girl. Listen closely, Evelyn, he'd said, his eyes hard as flint. In this world there are two types of people, those who control and those who are controlled. Control is power and power is everything. Never forget that. And I never did. Those words became my mantra, the driving force behind every decision I made. I clawed my way to the top of the real estate world, building an empire of one property at a time. I was ruthless, relentless, unstoppable. And I loved every minute of it. But success, as they say, comes at a price. And in my case, that price was my family. I missed Lainey's first steps because I was closing a deal in Dubai. I wasn't there for Jack's school play because I was smoothing potential investors at a charity gala. And Daniel? Well, Daniel had become little more than a footnote in the grand story of my life. It wasn't always like this, of course. When we first met, Daniel and I were equals. He was a rising star at Mercedes, his keen eye for detail and passion for automobiles marking him as management material. We were young, ambitious, and madly in love. We'd spend hours talking about our dreams, our plans for the future. We were going to conquer the world together. But somewhere along the way things changed. As my career skyrocketed, Daniel seemed content to settle into a comfortable routine. He found joy in the simple things, cooking elaborate meals, tending to our garden, being there for our children in all the ways I couldn't or wouldn't be. At first I found it endearing. Daniel was my rock, my safe harbor in the storm of my high-powered career. But as time went on, resentment began to creep in. Why wasn't he pushing himself harder? Why was he satisfied with being just a manager when he could be so much more? I started to see his domesticity as a weakness, his contentment as a lack of ambition. And bit by bit, I began to lose respect for the man I had once admired so much. Which brings us back to that fateful night at the Hendersons. As I watched Daniel's retreating back, something inside me cracked. For the first time in years I saw myself clearly and I didn't like what I saw. "Excuse me," I muttered to no one in particular, pushing my way through the crowd. I needed air, needed to escape the judgmental stares and whispered conversations. I found myself in the Hendersons' meticulously manicured rose garden, the sweet scent of flowers doing little to calm my churning stomach. What had I done? How had I let things get this far? My phone buzzed in my hand, a text from Lele. "Mom, where are you? You promised you'd be at my recital tonight." And just like that, the carefully constructed forte of my life came crushing down around me. I had forgotten my own daughter's dance recital. Again. I sank onto a nearby bench, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The cool metal was a shock against my skin, grounding me in a moment that felt surreal. How many other moments have I missed? How many promises have I broken? As I sat there, surrounded by roses that seemed to mock me with their perfect beauty, I thought about the life I had built. Sure, I was successful by any measure. I had a corner office with a view of the city skyline, a banker camp with more zeros than I could have ever dreamed of, and a reputation as one of the shrewdest real estate investors in the game. But at what cost? I thought about Lele, my beautiful, talented daughter, who was probably on stage right now, scanning the audience for a mother who would never show up. I thought about Jack, my quiet, sensitive son, who had stopped trying to tell me about his day, because I was always too busy to listen. And Daniel. Oh, Daniel. The man who had loved me unconditionally, who had supported my dreams even as I belittled his. The man who had kept our family together while I was busy chasing the next big deal. What had my father's words of wisdom gotten me in the end? A successful career, yes. But a broken family, a loveless marriage, and a gnawing emptiness that no amount of money or power could fill. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. Real gut-wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the mother I had failed to be, for the wife I had become, and for the woman I had lost somewhere along the way. I'm not sure how long I sat there, mascara streaking down my face, my carefully coiffed hair coming undone. As the tears finally subsided, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something had to change. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to work. My assistant Sarah was so shocked she asked me to repeat myself 3 times. But Mrs. Prescott, she sputtered, you have the Morgan deal closing today and the board meeting this afternoon. And cancel it all, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. And Sarah, clear my schedule for the rest of the week. I'm taking some personal time. I could practically hear her jaw hit the floor through the phone. In the 15 years she had worked for me, I had never taken a personal day. Hell, I had worked through a bout of pneumonia that had left me bedridden for a week, conducting conference calls between coughing fits. But today was different. Today I had a family to save. My first stop was Jack's school. As I walked through the familiar hallways, I realized with a pang of guilt that I couldn't remember the last time I'd been here. Parent-teacher conferences, school plays, PTA meetings, I had missed them all. Always too busy with work to make time for these trivial matters. I found Jack's classroom easily enough. Through the small window in the door, I could see him sitting at his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked on what looked like a math problem. My heart swelled with a mixture of love and regret. When had he gotten so big? Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door. The teacher, a kind-looking woman in her mid-40s, answered with a puzzled expression. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm Evelyn Prescott," I said, suddenly feeling very small. Jack's mother. I was wondering if I could speak with him for a moment. The teacher's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Oh, of course, Mrs. Prescott." "Jack," she called over her shoulder. "Your mother is here to see you." The look on Jack's face when he saw me standing there was like a knife to my heart. Surprise, confusion, and a flicker of something else. Hope maybe. Crossed his features before settling into a carefully neutral expression. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Is everything okay?" I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. One had my presence in my son's life become so rare that he assumed something must be wrong for me to be here. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I managed to say. I wanted to see you. I thought maybe we could have lunch together." "If that's okay with your teacher, of course," I added hastily, turning to the woman who was watching our interaction with undisguised interest. "I think we can make an exception this once," she said with a warm smile. "Jack's ahead in his studies anyway. Go on, enjoy your lunch." As we walked out of the school, Jack's hand tucked tentatively in mine. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I could still fix this. We ended up at a small diner near the school, the kind of place I would have normally turned my nose up at. But as I watched Jack devour a cheeseburger with gusto, regaling me with stories about his friends and his latest science project, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "Mom," he said suddenly, setting down his burger and fixing me with a serious look that seemed far too mature for his 12 years. "Not that I'm not happy to see you, but why are you really here?" I felt my carefully prepared speech dying on my lips. In that moment, looking into my son's eyes, eyes that were so much like his father's, I knew that only the truth would do. "I'm here because I've been a terrible mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've missed so much of your life, of Lully's life, and I want to do better. I need to do better if you'll let me." Jack was quiet for a long moment, absently pushing a French fry around his plate. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were shining with uncheered tears. "I'd like that," he said softly. "I've missed you, Mom." Those 4 words broke something open inside me. Before I knew it, I was crying again, right there in the middle of the diner. But this time Jack was there, his small arms wrapped around me in a fierce hug. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered. "We'll figure it out together." As we sat there, mother and son reunited, I made a silent vow. This was just the beginning. I had a lot of work to do, a lot of bridges to rebuild. But for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. I started seeing a therapist, something I had always scoffed at in the past. I didn't have time to sit around talking about my feelings, I used to say. But as I sat in Dr. Rosenberg's office, peeling back layers of defensiveness and pride, I realized how much I had needed this. "Control is an illusion, Evelyn," Dr. Rosenberg said during one of our sessions. "The more we try to control everything around us, the more we end up feeling out of control." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. How much of my life had I spent chasing this illusion of control? How many moments have I missed because I was too busy trying to manipulate every aspect of my existence? At work, I started delegating more. It was hard at first. I had always prided myself on being involved in every aspect of every deal. But as I watched my team step up, taking on more responsibility and thriving under the trust one placed in them, I realized that letting go didn't mean losing control. If anything, it made our operation run more smoothly. Mrs. Prescott, my assistant Sarah, said to me one day, a look of concern on her face. "Are you feeling all right?" I laughed, probably the first genuine laugh I'd had in the office in years. "I'm fine, Sarah. Better than fine, actually." "Why do you ask?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's just, you seem different. Happier, maybe. And you haven't worked past 6 p.m. in weeks." I smiled, touched by her concern. "I'm learning that there's more to life than work, Sarah. Speaking of which, why did you head home early today? I'm sure your family would appreciate it." The look of shock on her face was almost comical. But as she gathered her things, I saw a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. At home, things were complicated. Daniel and I were like 2 strangers living under the same roof, tiptoeing around each other, unsure of how to bridge the chasm that had grown between us. But I was determined to try. I started small. I made sure I was home for dinner every night, even if it meant leaving work early. I asked Daniel about his day, really listened when he talked about the latest developments at Mercedes. And slowly, tentatively, we started to reconnect. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Daniel turned to me with a serious expression. "Evelyn," he said, his voice soft but firm. "What's going on? Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the changes you've been making. But I can't help feeling like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." I took a deep breath, setting down the plate I had been drying. This was it, the moment of truth. "I've been seeing a therapist," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've realized. God, Daniel, I've realized what an awful wife and mother I've been. How I've taken you for granted, how I've neglected our children. I'm trying to change to be better. For you, for the kids, for myself." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he started to laugh. "What's so funny?" I asked, feeling a mix of confusion and indignation. "I'm sorry," he said, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. "It's just, do you remember our first apartment? That tiny little shoebox with the leaky faucet and the temperamental oven?" I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we moved in?" He continued. "You said, one day we're going to look back on this and laugh. But right now we're going to roll up our sleeves and make this place a home." I felt a lump forming in my throat as the memory washed over me. We had been so young, so in love, ready to take on the world together. That's what we need to do now, Evelyn, Daniel said, reaching out to take my hand. Roll up our sleeves and make this marriage a home again. It won't be easy and it won't happen overnight. But if you're willing to try, so am I. I looked at this man, this wonderful, patient, loving man who had stood by me through everything, and felt a rush of love so powerful it merely knocked me off my feet. I'm willing, I whispered, squeezing his hand. I'm more than willing. And so we began the slow and sometimes painful process of rebuilding our marriage. We started seeing a couples therapist, learning to communicate in ways we had forgotten. We set aside time each week for date nights, rediscovering the simple joy of just being together. It wasn't always easy. There were arguments, moments of frustration when old habits threatened to resurface. But we persevered, both of us committed to making this work. With the kids, I threw myself into being present in a way I never had before. I attended every one of Lily's dance practices, cheering her on from the sidelines. I helped Jack with his science fair project, spending hours in the garage building a model solar system. One Saturday morning, as I was helping Lily practice her pirouettes in the backyard, she suddenly stopped and looked at me with a serious expression. "Mom," she said, her voice small. "Are you going to leave again?" I felt my heart breaking all over again. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm not going anywhere. I know I haven't always been there for you. I'm so sorry for that. But I promise you I'm here now. And I'm not leaving." She buried her face in my shoulder, a small body shaking with silent sobs. I held her close, stroking her hair and whispering words of love and reassurance. In that moment, I vowed to myself that I would spend the rest of my life making up for the time I had lost with my children. As the weeks turned into months, I felt myself changing in ways I never thought possible. The ruthless businesswoman who would stop at nothing to close a deal was still there, but she was tempered now by a newfound sense of perspective. I learned to leave work at work, to be fully present when I was with my family. One particularly memorable evening, I found myself sitting on the floor of Jack's room, surrounded by a sea of Lego bricks. We were building a replica of the Eiffel Tower, project Jack had been talking about for weeks. "Mom," Jack said, his brow furrowed in concentration as he searched for a particular piece. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, handing him the piece he was looking for. "You can ask me anything." He was quiet for a moment, carefully attaching the Lego brick before looking up at me. "Why did you decide to change? I mean, I'm really happy you did, but what made you realize you needed to?" I took a deep breath, considering my answer carefully. How do you explain to a 12-year-old the complexities of adult regret and redemption? "Do you remember the story of Ebenezer Scrooge?" I asked. Jack nodded. "Yeah, the mean old guy who hated Christmas, right?" I smiled. "That's right. Well, I had a bit of a Scrooge moment myself. I realized that I had been so focused on making money and being successful that I had forgotten about the most important things in life. You, your sister, your dad. I saw what I was missing, and I knew I had to change before it was too late." Jack was quiet for a moment, digesting this information. Then he looked up at me with a small smile. "I'm glad you did, Mom. I like having you around." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "I like being around kiddo," I said, pulling him into a hug. "Now let's finish this tower, shall we?" As we continue building, I marvel at the resilience of children. Despite my years of neglect, Jack had welcomed me back into his life with open arms. I silently renewed my vow to never take that for granted again. At work, the changes were noticeable too. My team seemed more relaxed, more creative. We were closing deals at a rate we never had before. And our client satisfaction scores were through the roof. "I don't know what's changed," one of our biggest clients said to me during a meeting. "But whatever it is, keep it up. Your team seems happier, more engaged. It's reflecting the quality of your work." I smiled, thinking about how my personal growth had rippled out to affect every aspect of my life. "Thank you," I said. "We've made some changes in how we approach work-life balance. I'm glad to hear it's paying off." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just a few short months. The woman who had publicly humiliated her husband at a party seemed like a stranger to me now. And yet, I knew she was still a part of me. A reminder of who I had been and who I never wanted to be again. When I got home, the house was filled with the smell of something delicious cooking. I found Daniel in the kitchen, stirring a pot of what looked like his famous homemade tomato sauce. "Hey you," I said, wrapping my arms around him from behind and planting a kiss on his cheek. "Need any help?" Daniel turned, a look of mock surprise on his face. "Evelyn Prescott, offering to help in the kitchen. Who are you and what have you done with my wife?" I laughed, playfully swatting his arm. "Very funny. Seriously though, what can I do?" He smiled, handing me a cutting board and a handful of fresh basil. "You can chop this for me, but be careful, I know how dangerous you are with a knife." As we worked side by side in the kitchen, chatting and laughing, I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. This, I realized, was what I had been missing all those years. This simple, domestic moment was worth more than any multi-million-dollar deal I had ever closed. Later that night, as we sat around the dinner table, all four of us together, I looked at the faces of my family and felt a surge of love so strong it almost overwhelmed me. "I have an idea," I said, setting down my fork. "How about we take a vacation? All of us together. We could go to that beach house we used to rent when the kids were little." The look of shock on their faces would have been comical if it wasn't so heartbreaking. When was the last time I had suggested a family vacation? "Really?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "You mean it?" I nodded, smiling at her enthusiasm. "I mean it. 2 weeks, just the four of us. No work, no dance practice, no science projects. Just family time." "But what about your work?" Dia laughed, his tone cautious but hopeful. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. "Work can wait. This is more important." The vacation was, well, it was both wonderful and terrifying. Wonderful because for the first time in years, I was fully present with my family. We built sandcastles, flew kites and stayed up late playing board games. I got to know my children again, learning about their hopes and dreams, their fears and insecurities. But it was also terrifying because for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was completely disconnected from work. No phone calls, no emails, no last-minute crisis to handle. At first, the silence was deafening. I found myself reaching for my phone out of habit, only to remember that I had locked it away in the safe for the duration of our trip. But as the days went by, I felt the tension leaving my body. I slept better than I had in years, lulled to sleep by the sound of the waves crushing on the shore. I laughed more, worry lines smoothing out of my face. One evening, as Daniel and I walked along the beach at sunset, he turned to me with a soft smile. "You know," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves, "I think I'm falling in love with you all over again." I felt my heart skip a beat. "Really?" I asked, suddenly feeling shy, like the young woman who had first fallen for this kind, gentle man all those years ago. He nodded, pulling me close. "Really? The Evelyn I see now, she reminds me of the woman I married. Strong but also kind. Ambitious but not at the expense of the things that really matter." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I'm trying," I whispered. "I'm really trying." "I know," he said, wiping away a tear that had escaped down my cheek. "And I'm so proud of you." As we stood there on the beach, the sun dipping below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt truly, completely happy. The transition back to real life after our vacation wasn't easy. The mountain of work that had piled up in my absence was daunting, to say the least. But I was determined not to fall back into old habits. I set clear boundaries with my team. No emails after 7 p.m. No working on weekends unless it was an absolute emergency. And I stuck to them, even when it was difficult. There were moments of doubt, of course. Times when I worried that I was letting people down. That the business would suffer because of my new priorities. Then I would come home to find Lily waiting to show me a new dance routine. Or Jack eager to tell me about a book he was reading. And I knew I was making the right choice. One particularly challenging day at work, I found myself staring at my computer screen, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of tasks that needed my attention. Without thinking, I reached for my phone, ready to cancel the family dinner plans we had for that evening. But then I paused, my finger hovering over the screen. I thought about the look of disappointment that would cross my children's faces, the quiet resignation in Daniel's eyes. And I made a different choice. I stood up, grabbed my coat and walked out of the office at 5 p.m. sharp, ignoring the startled looks from my team. As I drove home, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The work would still be there tomorrow. But these moments with my family were precious and fleeting. That night, as we sat around the dinner table, laughing and sharing stories about our day, I knew without a doubt that I had made the right decision. Months passed and slowly but surely, our family found a new rhythm. We had our ups and downs, of course. There were still arguments and misunderstandings, but we faced them together as a team. I learned to let go of my need for control, to embrace the messiness and unpredictability of family life. I discovered that there was joy in spontaneity, in letting things unfold naturally rather than trying to orchestrate every moment. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. I padded downstairs to find Daniel, Lily and Jack in the midst of what looked like a flower war. The kitchen was a disaster zone, white powder covering every surface including my family. For a moment, I felt the old Evelyn rising up, ready to scold them for the mess. But then Jack looked up, his face split in a wide grin and called out, "Mom, come help us make pancakes." And just like that, I felt the tension leave my body. I laughed, grabbed a handful of flour and joined in the chaos. Later, as we sat around the table eating slightly misshapen but delicious pancakes, I looked at my flour-covered family and felt my heart swell with love. "You know," I said, reaching out to wipe a smudge of syrup from Lily's cheek, "I think this might be the best breakfast I've ever had." And it was true. Not because the pancakes were particularly gourmet, but because we had made them together. Because for once I hadn't been worried about the mess, or the wasted time, or the hundreds of emails waiting for me. I had simply been present, enjoying the moment with the people I loved most in the world. As the years went by, I watched my children grow and flourish. Lily blossomed into a talented dancer, her grace and poise on stage taking my breath away. Jack's passion for science led him to win the state's science fair, his project on renewable energy earning him a scholarship to a prestigious summer program. And through it all I was there. Not just physically present but emotionally engaged. I cheered at dance recitals and science fairs. I comforted them through first heartbreaks and celebrated their victories, big and small. My relationship with Daniel deepened and strengthened. We rediscovered the spark that had brought us together in the first place. But now it was tempered by years of shared experiences of weathering storms together. Work was still important to me, but it no longer defined me. I found a balance that allowed me to be successful in my career without sacrificing my family. And to my surprise, this new approach led to even greater success. My team was more loyal, more creative, more productive. We were doing better than ever, but now success was just one part of a rich, fulfilling life. One evening, as Daniel and I were preparing dinner together, a routine we had fallen into and grown to love, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, stirring the pasta sauce absently, "I was thinking,